My name is Emma Strömberg and I work at IVL Swedish Environmental Research Institute as an expert in polymeric materials. I'm going to give a brief description of what happens with plastics in a marine environment and how we expose materials in the field. When plastics end up in a marine environment, they're exposed to a variety of different degradation possibilities. Factors that affect the salinity in the water temperature, the presence of oxygen, and the depth where they end up, and therefore exposure to UV light. Plastics are rather persistent in a marine environment, but in general, they will degrade faster closer to the surface than at the bottom or in the sediment due to absence of light, less oxygen, and lower temperatures. They can undergo mechanical degradation as well, which will be imposed by the movement of the waves or different physical objects, such as stones, sediment, or in cold waters, there could be ice that can damage the material. This will promote formation of cracks and smaller material flakes, or even particles that will spread out in the environment. Also, photo-oxidation degradation process that is induced by presence of reactive oxygen and UV light results in cleavage of polymeric chains, making the material brittle and leading to formation of smaller fragments. Another factor that will promote degradation is the presence of microorganisms that can colonize the material surface and break it down enzymatically. When we expose polymeric materials in marine environment, we have to make sure that it is conducted in a controlled manner, designing the setup so that the samples are exposed to all of the factors simultaneously. As you can see here, the samples, sheets of approximately 12 by 12 centimeters, are placed in individual sockets, which are attached to a frame. This setup is then submerged directly into the sea at a depth of approximately 20 centimeters. This allows the samples to remain rather close to the surface. We keep the samples in the marine environment for a year to expose them during different conditions, such as different temperatures and light conditions. During the experiments, we measure the temperature in air and water, the light intensity, and the salinity in the water. During winter, there are periods of time with ice formation, which can affect the mechanical degradation of the materials. We remove some samples after predetermined periods of time and investigate if any degradation has occurred and how the material properties have changed. Here you can see some samples of removed materials and the extent of biofouling on the surface of the material. The materials that we study are bio-based materials, polylactide, polybutylene succinate, and polyhydroxyalkanoate. These materials can be used for a variety of applications that can end up in the marine environment. For example, cutlery, packaging, toys, or mulch films. It is important for us to study what happens to the materials in this environment, meaning their degradation profiles. It is, of course, preferable that any material that unintentionally ends up in the marine environment fully degrades, meaning that no residues remain. It is also important that the degradation products are completely harmless in that environment. What we want to know is how the different properties, such as mechanical, morphological, are affected after the exposure, meaning if the material becomes brittle and fragmented. We also want to determine if the photo-oxidation has occurred, since this indicates that the degradation in the material has started. What we see is that the materials remain rather intact in the marine environment without any major degradation occurring. We can see some deterioration of the mechanical properties, but no photo-oxidation and no fragmentation. We could, however, detect some pore formation for the PHBV material, which means that the degradation of the samples could progress faster due to access to more surface that can be degraded. It is important to point out that we're exposing our samples in rather cold conditions, and the results could be different in warmer water, for example, in the Mediterranean Sea. It is also possible that the microorganisms that colonize our samples need longer time to degrade the material, or that they lack the necessary enzymes which could be present in other marine environments. To sum up, the plastics that end up in marine environment are degrading very slowly, and therefore littering must be avoided regardless of the material used for the application. The materials might, however, become porous and prohibit biofouling and therefore promote degradation. But before introducing a product on the market, thorough investigation is needed to determine the time aspect and the process of the degradation if the product is assumed to degrade in the marine environment. Thank you for your attention.